It seems like everywhere you turn these days, there's a new weight loss solution, especially medications that work by suppressing your appetite. But what if there was a way to tap into your body's own systems for managing weight? Maybe a way that's even more effective and with fewer downsides.
Well, that's what's so exciting about some groundbreaking research coming out of Stanford medicine. They've used artificial intelligence to discover a naturally occurring molecule that shows real promise for weight management.
Okay, so this isn't some synthetic drug we're talking about. It's something our bodies already make.
Exactly.
And we're basing this deep dive today on a study that these Stanford researchers published in Nature on March 5th, 2025. So our mission today is to help you understand this discovery, how AI helped uncover it, and why it could be a real game changer in how we approach weight loss and management in the future.
That's right. I'm here to help break down the science and really get into the big picture.
Great. So before we get into the specifics of this new molecule, can we talk a bit about why this is such an important area of research? We know that medications like semaglutide, which is the active ingredient in Ozempic, have been really successful in helping people lose weight by suppressing appetite.
Yeah, semaglutide has been a huge breakthrough for a lot of people, no question about it. But there are some common side effects that come with it, like nausea and constipation, sometimes even some muscle loss. And it kind of acts broadly in the body. It's not just targeting appetite control.
Right. It affects a bunch of different systems.
Exactly.
Which leads us perfectly into this new molecule that researchers are excited about, a naturally occurring peptide that they've named BRP. So what exactly is BRP?
Okay. So BRP stands for Brin P2-related peptide. And it's a small protein. It's only made up of 12 amino acids, and our bodies produce it naturally. What's remarkable is that in these early studies they've done with mice and pigs, BRP has shown really similar appetite-suppressing and weight-reducing effects to semaglutide.
Wow, so similar benefits to Ozempic. That's pretty impressive. But here's where things get really interesting. The initial research suggests that BRP might not come with all those not-so-fun side effects.
That's right, and that's what makes this so potentially game-changing for you. We could be talking about weight loss solutions that are not only effective, but also much gentler on your body. And this research suggests that this might actually be possible using something our bodies already produce naturally.
So effective weight loss, but without the nausea or other issues. Sign me up.
Yeah, the animal studies have been really impressive. And the animals that were given BRP experienced similar reductions in their food intake and weight gain as those that were given semaglutide. But, and this is key, they didn't show any of the signs of nausea or food aversion. There were no changes in their normal activity levels or how much water they drank, no signs of increased anxiety, and their digestion seemed totally normal too.
That's a huge difference. So we're seeing similar results, but with potentially a much smoother ride.
Yeah.
Okay, so if it's getting similar results in a way that seems to be a lot easier on the body, how is it actually working? What's the mechanism here?
Well, that's a key distinction. Although BRP leads to very similar outcomes as semaglutide, it seems to be working in a much more targeted way. So semaglutide, as we said, works on what are called GLP-1 receptors. And these receptors are found all over the body, in the brain, in the gut, in the pancreas, you name it.
Right, everywhere.
But BRP seems to primarily act in a very specific part of the brain, the hypothalamus, which is kind of like the control center for your appetite and your metabolism.
Ah, okay. So instead of acting throughout the whole body, it's really focusing on the brain and how it manages hunger.
Right. It's like a scalpel instead of a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
And Dr. Katrin Svensson, who's the senior author of the study, she said something that really stuck with me. She pointed out that the receptors that semaglutide works on, those GLP-1 receptors, they're everywhere. But BRP is really honing in on the hypothalamus, and that's probably a big part of why it seems to have this more targeted effect and fewer side effects.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So how on earth did they even find this molecule? They really emphasize the role of artificial intelligence in the study. So can we talk about how AI factored into this whole discovery? This is where things get really, really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is where it gets fascinating. So the researchers used an AI algorithm. They called it Peptide Predictor. And their starting point was a class of proteins called prohormones.
Okay, prohormones, those are like the inactive forms of hormones, right? Like waiting to be flipped on.
You got it.
Yeah.
So prohormones are these larger inactive molecules, and they can be broken down into smaller active peptides, some of which are hormones. And these hormones, they regulate all kinds of things in your body, including how your body uses energy. The tricky part is that each prohormone can be chopped up in tons of different ways. It creates this really complex mix of peptides. And using traditional methods, if you wanted to try and find those specific peptide hormones in this sea of protein fragments, it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, that doesn't sound fun or very efficient.
Right. So they needed a smarter approach. So what they did was they focused on a specific enzyme that we know plays a key role in cutting up these larger protein molecules. And that enzyme is called prohormone convertase 13. And the interesting thing is that this same enzyme is also involved in producing GLP-1, which is what drugs like Ozempic mimic. So the researchers figured that other peptides that are important in metabolism, they might also be produced by this same enzyme.
Yeah, that's pretty clever. So they found a way to really narrow down their search, which makes sense. But how did they actually pinpoint BRP?
That's where the AI comes in, because instead of having to isolate and analyze countless proteins and peptides by hand, which would take forever, they trained their peptide predictor AI to recognize the cutting sites of that specific enzyme across all of the human genes that code for proteins. Then they looked for the proteins that are secreted out of the cell, because that's a characteristic of hormones, and they looked for proteins that had a bunch of potential cutting sites. This narrowed down the possibilities from thousands to just 373 prohormones.
Wow. That is some serious sifting and sorting the AI was doing. I'm glad I wasn't in charge of that.
Right. Dr. Svensson actually said in the study that the algorithm was absolutely key to our findings.
Makes sense.
And from those 373 prohormones, the algorithm predicted that this enzyme could generate over 2,000 unique peptides. So they then focused on the sequences that were most likely to be active in the brain.
Okay, so even with the AI, they still had a lot of potential candidates on their hands. So what did they do next to try to hone in on what BRP was?
Well, they went into the lab and they tested out 100 of these predicted peptides, including GLP-1, the one we already know about, to see if they could activate lab-grown brain cells. And what they found was remarkable. As they expected, GLP-1 increased the activity of these neurons by threefold compared to the control. But this tiny little 12 amino acid peptide, which they later named BRP because it's from the prohormone BRINP2, increased the neuronal activity tenfold.
Tenfold. That's a massive difference. So this little peptide was way more potent than even GLP-1 in these brain cells.
That's exactly what their initial lab studies suggested. It hinted that BRP could have a really powerful influence on the brain circuits that are controlling our metabolism.
That is super interesting. So it looked really promising in the lab, but what happened when they tested it out in animals? Did it have the same kind of effect in living, breathing creatures?
It did. They tested it out in both regular mice and mini pigs. Now, mini pigs are really interesting because their metabolism and their eating habits are actually much more similar to humans than mice are. So in both of these animal models, when they gave them a dose of BRP before they fed them, they found that it caused a significant reduction in how much food they ate, up to 50% less in the hour following the injection.
Wow, a 50% reduction. That is huge. What about the longer-term effects on their weight? Did they actually lose weight because of this?
Yeah, they did. They found that in obese mice that received daily injections of BRP over a period of 2 weeks lost an average of 3 grams. And what's really interesting is that most of this weight loss came from a reduction in fat. But the mice in the control group, the obese mice that didn't get the BRP, they actually gained about 3 grams over the same period. And on top of that, the mice that were treated with BRP also showed improvements in how their bodies processed glucose and insulin, which are really important markers of overall metabolic health.
And you mentioned earlier that they didn't see any of the usual side effects that you'd see with something like semaglutide in these animal studies, right?
Yeah, they didn't. The researchers did these behavioral tests on both the mice and the pigs, and they didn't find any big differences in their activity levels, or how much water they drank, any signs of anxiety, or even changes in how often they pooped compared to the animals that didn't get BRP. So this absence of obvious side effects is really encouraging. I mean, you see how existing treatments can be effective, but they come with these downsides, and that's what makes BRP so promising. You might be able to get the benefits without having to deal with the negative stuff.
That is really encouraging news. So what are the next steps for BRP? Are we on the verge of seeing human trials?
Well, that's the hope. The researchers are trying to identify the specific receptors that BRP binds to on brain cells, and understanding these receptors is going to give them a much clearer picture of exactly how BRP is working its magic. And they're also looking at ways to try and extend BRP's effects so it might not need to be dosed as often, which would be great. And yes, Dr. Svensson has actually co-founded a company to start human clinical trials of BRP. She's really eager to see if it's safe and effective in people.
That's very exciting. I mean, it's pretty amazing to think about a future where we could have this whole new generation of weight management therapies
Right.
based on natural molecules like this. And it sounds like it was a pretty big team effort to make this discovery.
Oh, yeah, definitely. There were researchers from the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Minnesota, the University of British Columbia. All these different people and areas of expertise came together to make this happen. And their work was funded by the NIH, the Spark Translational Research Program at Stanford, and a bunch of other sources, too. It was a big collaboration.
That's really cool. And just to be fully transparent with our listeners, the study does mention that there are some potential financial interests tied into this research, right?
Yeah, that's important to point out. Dr. Svensson and Dr. Coasolo, the lead author of the study, they're listed as inventors on patents that are related to BRP peptides for treating metabolic disorders. And Dr. Svensson is also a co-founder of a company called Merrifield Therapeutics. But these kinds of disclosures are totally standard practice. It's all about being transparent about any potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's good to have that context. So to wrap things up for you, our listeners, we've been talking today about this fascinating new peptide, BRP. It's a naturally occurring peptide, which is amazing. It was discovered using artificial intelligence, which is also amazing. And in these animal studies, it's been incredibly promising, suppressing appetite, causing weight loss, and it seems to be just as effective as existing medications like Ozempic, but without all of the negative side effects, so far at least.
It's really remarkable. And I think the fact that BRP appears to be working so specifically in the brain to control appetite makes it super interesting. It's different than how drugs like semaglutide work, and it might be a much more precise and potentially much safer way to think about weight management in the future.
It really is. Makes you wonder about what the future holds. What if we start to see more personalized weight management options based on these kinds of targeted molecules? And what if AI starts to really accelerate these kinds of discoveries in biology and medicine? I think this study is really just a glimpse into what might be possible.
It's so true. It really does make you think. And it shows that we're still learning so much about how our bodies regulate appetite and metabolism. And the more we understand, the better chance we have of coming up with really innovative ways to improve our health and well-being.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And this brings up a really interesting question for you to consider. What if our understanding of appetite leads to more than just managing weight? What if it helps us develop a more holistic and personalized approach to metabolic health and just feeling our best? It's something to think about.
It definitely is.